This week we're going to talk about delusion. There are, most weeks, I'm concerned about the direction that things are heading. This week I would say I'm very concerned, and I'll explain for that pretty early on in my talk today. And I just hope my slides are in order. We talk about the convergence of signs, and one of the leading indicators of that is deception and delusion. Jesus talked about it in Matthew chapter 24. Secular people in the world, these are some old magazine covers from Foreign Policy from a year or two ago, and even secular people notice that things are not going that well in the world right now. There are certain exceptions. For example, our president will get up and say it's more peaceful and better than it's ever been. And in his mind it is, but he has a plane. He has a 747 he can fly around whenever he wants, and he gets to play golf every day. So I probably would have a different view of the world if I could do those type of things also. But starting, it's really been 5 years now since, a little over 5 years now, since the Arab Spring started. And things really have not calmed down in the Middle East. So that's half a decade that things have been going like this. So today's verse that we'll look at, for the mystery of iniquity, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now I know that strong delusion that's talked about, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11, is yet future. It'll get worse. But with the warnings of Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 about deception, about the apostasy and falling away that's referred to in the early part of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and then this verse about this strong delusion that's coming. And it doesn't say just delusion, it says strong delusion. Those things are going to be in place well before we get to this point in the 70th week when this strong delusion comes. So it'll be a progression, and it's going to accelerate. And as I looked at things this week, I think you, I hope, are like me. You see things going on in the world, you see what politicians say, you see what people say, and it's like, what planet are they living on? Do they live on the same planet that I do? And the answer is they do, but they're under deception. And so one of the reasons we talk about it so much here is to kind of let the remnant church sort of have know that they still have a grip on reality, that if you're seeing these things and they're bothering you and you're troubled by them, that's a good sign. You're not losing your mind. They are. They've really been given over, and it's troubling to watch because I see it all the time, and people just don't seem to reason or be able to reason. Now, one of the most influential churches in America, the world, is North Point Church down in Atlanta. I hear it has 25 to 30,000 people meeting in their church services each Sunday or weekend. They're very influential with their catalyst conferences that are affiliated with the church and its pastor. And I'll just say this, I'm not going to make a lot of comment. I just want to show you what took place July 24th and July 31st in their worship service. So here, and there's no sound on this video, guys. This is a video of the opening of their worship service. And you're going to see these guys come out. It was called the 1990s. And what they're doing is they're singing a Boyz II Men song. And they do a whole medley and dance routine, grinding and bumping and weaving all over the stage. And this is a church service. Do you understand that? A church service. And everybody stayed, it looks like. And then, look, if we ever do that here, you have my permission to get up and walk out. This is a song. Then the next week they had a medley of songs by a formerly popular group, only half of which is still alive. And I'll play a little bit of it. I don't know if the sound on this is pretty long, but this is the concluding song of the opening medley for the worship service at church last week.
Sound great. Let's get those hands waving this way. Here we go.
Okay, take the sound out. Okay, so this is not helpful to the cause of Christ. Can I just be so bold as to say that? And this is done in church after church after church after church. The church down by Cincinnati has remember they used to have the sort of Jesus coming up out of the water there at Monroe right along 75, and it got hit by lightning and burned. So what did they do? Now they have a Jesus walking on the water thing, or it looks like he's getting ready to walk on the water. And the pastor there, they had Rodeo Sunday, and they brought in a bull, and the pastor did bull riding in the church, in a ring in the church. It's stunning to me. So everybody says, well, the church is not like the world. But what I'm saying is when you see that go on, then you see sort of the rampant paganism, globalism, climate worship thing that goes on like at the opening. And I didn't watch it. I just read some articles about it because it just irritates me to watch these opening ceremonies at the Olympics and whatnot. And I understand they had transgenders on tricycles riding around and during the opening ceremonies. And this is where the world is. And it's built these brand new stadiums. And this is a high resolution picture taken about a year ago of a slum in Rio de Janeiro, not that far from the stadium. I mean, look at the density of that. And I heard a story that somebody was practicing kayaking, and wherever they're doing the kayaking, and they bumped into a human hand floating in the water there. So, but this was, here's what Breitbart said in their article about this: the pseudo-history, preachy environmentalism, and multiculturalist pageantry of Rio's opening ceremonies. While Jesus was present but inconspicuous in Maracana Stadium, another god, the rainforest, was omnipresent, if not omnipotent. Promoting world peace is the basis of the Olympic spirits, the organizers informed. Today, there is an urgent need to also promote peace with the planet. Climate change and the depletion of natural resources need our attention, and the Olympic opening ceremony is a wonderful opportunity to shed light on this subject. And what was the penultimate moment of the opening ceremonies? Lighting a big flame to throw a bunch of carbon emissions into the air, I guess. You can come to your own conclusion on that. Somebody's Facebook friend shared this morning, lives in Australia. This is from the Canberra Times a couple days ago. By the way, I have an app that gets me a digital reproduction of the pages, every page of about 5,000 or 6,000 newspapers around the world. So I can usually dig out the actual articles through that app. Move to outlaw vilification in the ACT on grounds of religion. So here's this politician. This is a proposed legislation there. The Green Shane Rattenberry will move on Thursday to outlaw vilification on the grounds of religion. Mr. Rattenberry said religious vilification laws were needed more than ever. Instead, though, of limiting vilification to public acts, all actions that are communicated openly or observable publicly will be covered, even a place not generally open to the public, such as a workplace. This includes posts on social media, if they can be seen by the public, along with wearing clothes, signs, or flags that would incite hatred, contempt, ridicule, or revulsion. Somebody in Great Britain is now being prosecuted because he had a T-shirt with a ISIS flag and a word that begins with F, ISIS, on his shirt, and he was seen on TV, and when he got back to Great Britain from the European soccer matches, he was arrested for hate crime, for vilification of a religion. So his country goes and bombs ISIS, and if he expresses an opinion about it, he gets arrested. This is moronic. This is delusional. This is deception squared when this type of thing happens. Here's an old article that I saw this morning also. This is from 4 years ago. Christians have no right to wear the cross at work, says the government. This is in Great Britain. Because you see, the cross is not required. You're not required as a Christian to wear a cross. So therefore, if it's not mandatory for the religion and the employer doesn't want you to wear it, if you wear it, you can be fired. And they are now appealing this. The British government is taking this to get this approved or sanctioned by the European Commission or whatever. But this would never happen in America because we have freedom of speech and freedom of religion, right? And the protectors of freedom of speech and freedom of religion are lawyers. We promise to uphold the Constitution. We base our laws on the Constitution and the authority granted to the government by that. So this stuff would never happen in America, would it? You know I'm going to say wrong, right? This is a proposal that is being considered and to be voted on. It may have already been voted on, I don't know, at the American Bar Association meeting. Now, I went to one of those meetings in my life. I mainly went because it was in San Francisco and it was an easy side trip down to Pebble Beach. That was the main reason. But it was 1992, and there were two events one afternoon that I knew were on the agenda. And I told my partner, where are the keys to the van that we had rented? I'm going to play golf. He came along. What were they doing that afternoon? They were honoring two women. And the whole place was a Twitter with all kinds of excitement because here is coming Hillary Clinton, 1992. It was during the election. And the woman that they honored was Anita Hill, because she had testified against Clarence Thomas in the hearings. So here's the title of this resolution that is to be adopted. Now, you should understand, the American Bar Association makes up sort of model rules of practice, which are then adopted by every state, and your lawyer, you can be disciplined if you violate those rules. That's their model code of professional responsibility. Standing Committee on Ethics and Professional Responsibility, you can tell this committee was named by a lawyer, right? Standing Committee on Ethics and Professional Responsibility, Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, Commission on Disability Rights, Diversity and Inclusion, 360 Commission, Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Profession, Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Commission on Women in the Profession. Report to the House of Delegates, revised Resolution 109. Okay? This is what's proposed for part of the Professional Code of Responsibility. For me, a lawyer, that if this passes, I'll be subjected to. Now, this has been in the works for over a year. I think I've mentioned it here once or twice. It's gone through a couple of revisions. It was put out for comments. They got hundreds of comments. Hundreds of comments. I'll show you one of those in just a moment. Against this as a violation of free speech. When they put the book together for the delegates with this to look at when they considered to vote on it, they took out all the comments that expressed concerns about free speech. They're a bunch of fascists. That's why I don't belong to this organization anymore, because it's a bunch of left-wing nuts that have taken it over. And it's a political agenda. It's not about the profession, not the one that I am part of. It is professional misconduct for a lawyer. Now, this is just a standard one, and this is true, and this governs the lawyer. It is professional misconduct for a lawyer to engage in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. So what will happen is if a lawyer files a fraudulent tax return, even though that doesn't really relate to his practice of law, he's likely to be disbarred if he gets charged with filing a false tax return. So it actually governs conduct outside of what you consider the practice of law. It's very broad. So here's the new resolution, and you can see here that the red line version, they made a bunch of changes to it. So here's the new, it's section G. It is professional misconduct for a lawyer to do this. Engage in conduct that the lawyer knows or reasonably knows is harassment or discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, or socioeconomic status and conduct related to the practice of law. Now, the Christian Legal Society has taken a look at this, and their concern, which I share, is that the rule, even after all the revisions and looking at the comments, the rule still operates as a speech code that will have a chilling effect on lawyers' legitimate speech. And what they've done is, this used to be, some of this was in the comments section, to sort of how we will interpret this. They moved it to the black letter text. So that if you engage in this misconduct, you can be disbarred, disciplined, all the way up to disbarred, losing your license to practice law. These are some of the comments or the concerns of Christian Legal Society. The proposed rule would infringe on the free speech and free exercise rights of attorneys. I agree. The proposed rule, untethered as it is to any actual injustice or prejudice to the administration of justice, would subject a lawyer to discipline in any conduct that might be considered related to the practice of law, such as expression on CLE panels, membership in religious organizations, serving on boards of churches, and the like. And there were hundreds and hundreds of lawyers that wrote in opposition to this. So they revised the rule, they came out, and here's some of the sponsors of the rule: Civil Rights and Social Justice Section, Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, the National LGBT Bar Association. Here's one lawyer's comments. The notion, and he can say this now, okay, I don't know that he'll be able to say this after and still keep his license. Listen to what he says, and I agree 100% with what this guy says. I won't identify him. And there's hundreds of these. You can download the PDFs off the ABA website if you were so inclined. The notion that gender identity can be male, female, a blend of both, or neither, renders the definition nonsensical. To make it attorney misconduct for a lawyer to discriminate against something that is nonsensical is itself nonsensical. Further, the rules state, never argue with a lawyer. Further, the rule states it is misconduct to harass or knowingly discriminate. Harassment is not defined and is completely severed from intent. As the committee surely knows, in employment discrimination law, intent is the key. Here, anything an aggrieved party perceives as harassment is harassment, regardless of intent, and the attorney is subject to discipline. Expanding misconduct, including misconduct to conduct, quote, related to the practice of law rather than in the course of representation, means that all kinds of speech, association, activity, and thought, things specifically protected by the First Amendment, are open to prosecution by the disciplinary authorities that regulate the bar. Folks, this is coming everywhere. The lawyers in this case were sort of the canaries in the coal mine. They do it to us, they'll do it to you. You need to understand this. And you need to stand up against it. Now, a lot of people say, don't worry. The Supreme Court will uphold it. Oh, really? After a certain candidate appoints what she wants to the Supreme Court, you think this thing's going to get overturned? I don't think there's a chance. So all I want you to know is that it's not Canberra, it's not Australia, it's not Europe, it's not Britain, it's America. It's the United States of America that has the epitome of the free speech, First Amendment, protection of free speech. This is an assault on your rights. These are fascist, dictatorial, self-righteous. It's a religion for them. Okay? They are not rational people. Just want you to know that. So I may already be, if this passed yesterday, maybe I'm already committing misconduct. I don't care, okay? It's not going to change what I say, but I just want you to know that there will be consequences for taking a stand on these issues in the future. So, okay. Now, all these college protests we talked about, where people, you remember the young lady at Yale, she was like, you're supposed to be a parent to us, you're supposed to provide a safe home place for us. Remember that? The guy resigned that she was yelling at, by the way. He was a dorm parent or whatever. A lot of people that, even people that would be considered left-wing or liberal, are saying, what's going on? This is from the front page of the New York Times today. Amid college protests, alumni are less fond and less giving. One said this as an alumnus of the college. He wrote to Amherst, I guess it's called, no H. Amherst, as an alumnus of the college, I feel that I have been lied to, patronized, and basically dismissed as an old white bigot who is insensitive to the needs and feelings of the current college community. Article continues, alumni from a range of generations say they are baffled by today's college culture. Among their laments, students are too wrapped up in racial and identity politics. They are allowed to take too many frivolous courses. They have repudiated the heroes and traditions of the past by judging them by today's standards rather than in the context of their times. University administrators have been too meek in addressing protesters whose messages seem to fly in the face of free speech. A 1982 Yale graduate said he was on campus last fall when activists tried to shut down a free speech conference. I'll repeat that. You should be laughing hysterically at that. A 1982 Yale graduate said he was on campus last fall when activists tried to shut down a free speech conference. And he says, quote, because apparently they missed irony class that day. You'll see our English teacher here in the front row got that one. And it concludes with, this is not your daddy's liberalism. It's leftism, and it's a religion. And I've talked a lot about that. So I just want you to understand is, it's all part of the delusion that's coming, that's already here. I just think it's going to get worse. I'm a pessimist in that sense, but I'm an optimist in that it works out, and it's limited in time, I think. And I know what happens at the end. It's all okay. But until then, there'll be trouble. So that's what we have to live with. And we need to band together as Christians. Because look, there are going to be Christians losing their jobs. So what is the church going to do to help out the people who lose their jobs because they take a stand against this? They take a stand on biblical principles. What are we going to do? The body of Christ, churches need to be talking about that and deciding. This was a, okay, now we're going to talk about Middle East geopolitics for the rest of the time. This is a map that was leaked to a news organization. I think it was leaked to NBC. Everybody picked it up, and it shows the areas, at least in the Eastern Hemisphere, of where ISIS and its affiliates are active. It's sort of a heat map of what they're able to do. And it's everywhere. There's hardly a day goes by that you don't see a report. I mean, how many days were there this week? It's easier to identify the days now when there aren't attacks somewhere in the world than when there are. Did I say that right? Well, anyway, it's happening almost every day is what I'm trying to say. And here's an article from the New York Times yesterday. What price for a safe France? Perhaps a country's core values many fear. And it continues. They have a major problem with immigrants in Europe. There's no doubt about it. I don't know if I have the stats in here or not. I'll tell you right now. Germany last year, 1.3 million. 1.3 million. Stunning number. Stunning number. And, of course, U.S. could exceed, same page, U.S. could exceed Obama goal of accepting 10,000 Syrian refugees this year. New York Times also did a front page article, a global network of killers built by a secretive branch of ISIS. And now we have one country that's very strategically located, Turkey. The aftermath of the coup continues there. The Spectator in England this week came out with an article, the most powerful man in Europe. Who is it? Erdogan. Outside the United States, in NATO, it's the largest army. It's the largest military. It's larger than Britain and France combined, I believe, the military of Turkey. It's been a buffer, but it is now pretty much, I think you could probably, put the mark on there that it is an Islamist state. Erdogan has taken power. He's purging everybody. It's interesting what's happening because he's purging so many people from the military. He's weakened the military. He's weakened the education system. And so from support, he didn't turn to NATO and his allies there. He turned to Russia. And there were reports this week that I saw from pretty credible sources that before the coup got underway, about 10 hours before it started, Erdogan got a phone call from Russia and said, be careful, there's a coup underway going to be launched soon against you. And within 10 hours it was. He also got a phone call from another country and said, hey, when you do it, don't necessarily send the troops into the street. Use social media and stuff. It's a very effective way to control people. That call came from Iran. No, wait a minute. I thought Iran was Shia and Turkey is Sunni and they don't get along. They have a common goal. And they'll use each other to further that goal. So here you have a very interesting alliance of Russia, Iran, and Turkey all lining up together and protecting each other. It's one of the end-time alliances that we've talked about for decades here. Well, I've talked about it for decades. Turks say that the U.S. was behind the revolt. I have no idea. It's very complicated. But there you see Erdogan being welcomed by the assembly in Turkey, by the legislature, parliament. There's also all these things going on with the U.S. Air Base in Cleric, I think it's called. Very hard to determine what exactly is going on there and what the truth is. But there's a lot going on there. And Erdogan's using it, I'm pretty sure, at least pretty sure that Erdogan is kind of tweaking the United States and its ability to operate at that base as a propaganda tool to build himself up in the eyes of the Islamic world. I'm standing up to the great Satan. Look at me. Look how powerful I am. They have not done a thing to me because they know better. They should never do anything to me. And there are about a number of hydrogen bombs, maybe as many as 90, and there are also a number of nuclear weapons. Probably about 175 total between the bombs and the weapons at that base. And what happens if Erdogan gets a hold of them? Well, I'm sure his friends at Russia wouldn't help him out. In Belgium yesterday, another attack with a machete attacked police women while shouting Allahu Akbar. The Belgian government has not yet concluded that it was a terrorist attack or what motivated the person. But there was another attack in was it Russell Square in London, near where the bombs went off about a few months after, a year after 9/11, or less than a year after 9/11. So they have this, these are, everybody says, this would be a chart that Obama would use at his press conference, or his press secretary, Josh Earnest, who I will refer to henceforth as Joshing Earnestly, okay? Because I think he's got the perfect name for what he does. And it just shows that successful coups are falling. Okay, so there's a drop-off, and so everything's better in the world. There's no problem. But these are, just since 1966, the number of coups that have taken place in governments worldwide. It's kind of an interesting chart. In The Week, which is a British publication, there is an article this week called How Angela Merkel Imperiled Europe's Future. It's a stunning article. It's done in light of all of these terrorist attacks which have occurred in the last number of months and the number of people that have been killed. All seem to be tied to ISIS, but that's not the only thing that people should be afraid of. Here's another version of that map, Islamic State attacks outside of the core since June 2014. And you can pretty much see they've covered the whole world except for South America. But listen to some of what this article says. In a world filled with political bunglers, German Chancellor Angela Merkel deserves special mention for outstanding achievement in recklessness. Her refugee policy puts all of Europe at risk, though continental elites may be too zealous in their devotion to humanitarian ideals to recognize it. European elite culture is committed to a view of the world that abstracts from particular attachments, national attachments, ethnic attachments, religious attachments, and treats individuals as perfectly equal and interchangeable exemplars of capital H humanity. Pew Forum has a research paper out about the number of refugees. I guess it was in Europe, it was 1.3 million, not just Germany. The number, I think, is probably understated. An interesting part of that survey, though, is they found, and these numbers are percentages, what they found was of all the refugees, you can see the numbers there, female 0 to 17 were 10% of all refugees, 11% 18 to 34, 6% 35 and over. So that means of all the refugees that were in this survey for 2015, 27% of them were female. So what do you conclude from that? Setting aside the transgender issue for a moment, you would conclude rationally that 73% of them then are males. So about 3 times as many males as females, which is consistent with the pictures and photographs that we've seen of this. And 61% of those, 61% of the total population of refugees are males 0 to 34 years of age, military age. Only 12% are over 35 in terms of males. It's a stunning problem. The article in The Week continues this. That imbalance, much larger in some countries, points to a future in which considerable numbers of young men will find it extremely difficult to find spouses. And that's a serious problem. And we've talked about that here, especially with regard to Germany and India and their child selection policies and the government pushing for several decades one-child policies to keep the population down. And it really hasn't worked. Their populations still continue to grow, and they're each over 1 billion. Another article in Politico from earlier this year, Europe's man problem. Migrants to Europe skew heavily male, and that's dangerous. This article says this: societies with extremely skewed sex ratios are more unstable even without jihadi ideologues in their midst. Numerous empirical studies have shown that sex ratios correlate significantly with violence and property crime. The higher the sex ratio, skewing towards males, the worse the crime rate. It's a fact. I mean, look, even in our country, there's a remarkable difference between the number of males in prison and the number of females in prison. In First Things, French political philosopher Pierre Manent had an interview recently about what's going on in Europe and this immigration thing. And they asked him, what do you think? And this is a secular political professor, political philosopher. The French are exhausted, he says, but they are first of all perplexed, lost. Things were not supposed to happen this way. And now we see that religious affiliations and other collective attachments not only survive, but return with a particular intensity. Everyone can see and feel this, but how can it be expressed when the only authorized language is that of individual rights? We have become supremely incapable of seeing what is right before our eyes. You know, this is what the Bible says will happen. It's delusion. People will lose touch with reality, and for decades now, the educational system, the political system, has pushed us to this individual rights thing. And I like my individual rights, I want you to know that. But it's been pushed to the point where people can't talk about the problem or the attack on those, how those individual rights are being attacked. And so what do? Well, we put speech codes in place for lawyers. Because that'll solve the problem, won't it? Because if you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. It really is kind of a existential, philosophical. It's nuts. Okay, I feel like I'm in philosophy. I'm sure y'all went to college. You took a philosophy class, and you read Kant and some of these guys, these great philosophers. And I don't know what your reaction was. My reaction was, that guy is a loon. I mean, he's really lost touch with reality. Okay, and my professor up there, he seemed to enjoy this. I'm not so sure about him now either. But I got to get an A, so I'll work hard. But it's been this, it's like it's a snowball rolling downhill. And now it's this giant snowball, and nobody knows how to stop it. There is a way. It's called faith in Jesus Christ. But nobody will, you can't talk about that in the public square almost. You're to the point where you can't. This philosopher continues, we invite catastrophe by excluding from authorized debate on Turkey's possible joining the European Union the fact that Turkey is a massively Muslim country. And he says this, we do not know when the trumpet will sound. I cannot answer you in the name of some expertise. I can only answer by hope. Christian hope is based on faith. I believe that amid the crumbling of Western civilization, which has begun, the supernatural character of the church will become paradoxically more and more visible. The hatred of the world will turn against it more and more clearly. More clearly than ever, the fate of all will depend on the little flock of Christians. I've talked about this before, where the church is described in Scripture as a lampstand. And on a bright day, even those fancy LED headlights on your car, they don't do anything. They get lost in the light. But make it dark, and it becomes, that light, any light, becomes very effective. And that's a picture of the church in an increasingly dark time. So back to the article on the week. Having set out with the best of moral intentions to act like an extra-political citizen of a world without walls, Angela Merkel has ended up reaping a nationalist whirlwind, and the storm has only just begun to gather. Because you see, people who are concerned about their country, now they're the problem. You know, these right-wing groups. They're the ones we have to come down on. Not the people actually causing the problem, the people who might have a solution to the problem. Christians. People who want to, go back to the roots of the founding of their countries. It's crazy. Here's another story this week. Iran brags of golden fleece. They actually put a picture up on their TV of a pallet of cash. Unmarked bills, Swiss francs, euros. I don't know if there are American dollars in there or not. And this, they said, was ransom paid for the hostages that we got back in January when that Iranian pastor and 3 others were released. Supposedly $400 million was transferred at that time. Even the Wall Street Journal had a plane load of cash for Iran. Well, that came up at the White House press conference, and this reporter, Michelle, I don't know her last name, asked this question of joshing earnestly. Was that, and there were a number of questions, and this goes on for 5 minutes. I only have like about a 45-second clip. But there were all these questions from reporters. This was ransom, right? You paid the cash, you got the hostages. And he spent 20 minutes of that hour and 15-minute press conference not answering questions and explaining it away in a way that only someone whose moral compass is totally broke could do. And he may be a very nice guy, okay? But his moral compass has been destroyed. It might be time for him to go on vacation because he didn't actually come right out and lie. He just didn't answer the question. But Michelle asked him some questions about this.
Isn't it essentially a ransom payment then, even if the U.S. does not view it that way?
No, it is not a ransom payment.
Would those prisoners have been released then if this money hadn't been paid then?
I think what is true is that there were a team of negotiators.
But again, would those prisoners have been released then if this money had not been paid then?
What I can tell you is that our negotiators who were talking with the Iranians about what was necessary to secure the release of American citizens in Iran succeeded.
But it was a pretty simple question. Would those prisoners
let me just say one other thing about this.
Released if the money wasn't paid on that same weekend?
Well, again, I guess what I'm saying is it's a pretty simple negotiation that took place.
Okay, got that? He never said no, right? So there's still a little sliver of a conscience there in this man, and we might be able to rescue him. But one of the hostages did give an interview, or said in an interview, that, well, we were on the tarmac in the plane ready to go, and we had to wait 2 hours until another plane landed with the cash. Well, they didn't know what that plane had on it. Now we know they had cash on it. And it was unmarked bills. Well, Joshing Earnestly's boss explained it, so you know who that is. So here's a little bit of his explanation. I haven't played one of his for like 2 months, okay? So give me a break.
You'll recall that there were all these horror stories about how Iran was going to cheat and this wasn't going to work, and Iran was going to get $150 billion to finance terrorism and all these kinds of scenarios. And none of them have come to pass. And it's not just the assessment of our intelligence community, it's the assessment of the Israeli military and intelligence community, the country that was most opposed to this deal, that acknowledges this has been a game changer and that Iran has abided by the deal and that they no longer have the sort of short-term breakout capacity that would allow them to develop nuclear weapons. So what I'm interested in is if there's some news to be made, why not have some of these folks who were predicting disaster say, you know what, this thing actually worked? Now that would be a shock. That would be impressive. If some of these folks who had said the sky is falling suddenly said, you know what, we were wrong, and we are glad that Iran no longer has the capacity to break out in short term and develop a nuclear weapon. But of course that wasn't going to happen. Instead, what we have is the manufacturing of outrage in a story that we disclosed in January. And the only bit of news that is relevant on this is the fact that we paid cash. Which brings me to my last point. The reason that we had to give them cash is precisely because we are so strict in maintaining sanctions, and we do not have a banking relationship with Iran, that we couldn't send them a check. And we could not wire the money. And it is not at all clear to me why it is that cash, as opposed to a check or a wire transfer, has made this into a news story.
Oh, really? Not clear to you? Well, here, let me explain it to you. Terrorists use cash so they can hide themselves, Mr. President, and you know that as well as anybody else, so stop lying to us. And I think reporters ought to be questioning the presidential candidates about this like crazy, what they think of it. Here's Charles Krauthammer. Okay, was it ransom or not? Charles Krauthammer is a good writer, good thinker. Here's what he had to say.
As the hostages were getting ready to leave, one of the hostages on Fox Business Today said that they were stuck on the tarmac for about 2 hours, and they asked what the delay was, and he said, because we had to wait for another plane to land.
Because they had to wait for the ransom to arrive. That's what happens when you ransom a hostage. You wait until the cash arrives, and then the guy in all the movies is released to go across, the field where he's being released. Look, for them to try to pretend this was anything other than a ransom is laughable, and I think it hurts their credibility. You can argue it was the only way. You can argue we were in negotiations and we thought, what the heck, if we're going to give them 150 billion elsewhere, why not 1.7? It's not a lot. And then the president's a defense of the use of cash, as if this is, well, we couldn't wire the money. Well, why couldn't you wire it? He said because of sanctions. Well, that means because they were actually going around the law, going around sanctions, and they had to do it illicitly, clandestinely, at night, the way it's done by gangsters. That's because they were doing ransom. They didn't want anyone to know, and they had to go around the law and the Congress. The Congress didn't know. No, this is not old news. It's new news, and it's highly embarrassing. And the president, I have to admit, he's rather good with words. He made it sound like this was just completely natural.
Joshing earnestly learns at the feet of the master of lies. Well, one of the other ones you might not have caught in there, he said that, the president said that even Israel isn't happy with this deal, and they think it's done great, right? That's their assessment. Boy, Netanyahu didn't like that, and they came out, they slammed Obama, likening the Iran deal to Munich, the one that Chamberlain entered into with Hitler. The Americans tend not to forget such insults. So, So where is all this going? I have 2 articles and then we are done. And no, if we get done a little bit early today, I'm not ill. Okay, I'm okay. Don't worry about it, you know. The Edinger report is number 1. And I'll just summarize this because I have a bunch of slides, but I'll just summarize what's going on. The United States and Israel are negotiating another 10-year deal on military aid to Israel. Right now, we pay them about $3.1 billion a year. Israel agrees to certain things. We agree to certain things. There's issues about transfer of technology and that type of thing. And they're a close ally, so we have this agreement. And they're in the process of negotiating another one. And listen, what Obama is trying to do is he's trying to change the terms of the agreement so that the Congress will not, the new Congress coming in, elected by the American people, which really are the ones who get to control this, they will not be able to do anything to change it for 10 years. Now, why would Obama want to do that for 10 years? I mean, it's all these executive orders and stuff he's putting in. It's going to take somebody a lot of years just to unwind all the things that he's done. It's not as simple as coming in and just hitting the delete key in the Code of Federal Regulations. There's a process. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to take the ability of Congress to oversee this deal for 10 years. And I think it's odd. He's leaving office, right? So really, what does he care? He can go live in his $25,000 a month house in D.C. and play golf every day and go around like Bill Clinton did and make $150 million. And listen, whatever Clinton has made giving speeches, Obama is going to at least double it. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, he's set for life. So this is what he's trying to do by putting this deal in place and the restrictions on it. And a lot of people have really gotten upset about it. Yorm Edinger writes a really good article about it. And he says, let's see, he concludes with this. The U.S. and Israel cannot afford to base their strategic cooperation on a fixture framework, ignoring global herky-jerky trends. Because he says this, we entered into the last agreement in 2007, and did the world change over the last 10 years? And Edinger is a very intelligent guy. He's been an ambassador. He knows what he's talking about. And he's right. We have to be flexible. He says this, the United States and Israel should not demote and exclude the co-equal Congress from the process of strategic cooperation at a time of a potential European collapse, swift proliferation of Islam-driven terrorism, an emboldened regime of the Ayatollahs, and a possible toppling of pro-U.S. regimes in the Middle East, which further exacerbate the security problem. Caroline Glick, actually I have 2 things to do, and so I'll truncate my review of Caroline Glick's great column in the Jerusalem Post on Friday titled Obama's Legacy. And she says this, why did the Obama administration decide to escalate its attacks against Israel last week? Remember, they came out that what was the purpose of the State Department's shockingly hostile assault last Wednesday following the Israel Lands Authority's announcement that it is publishing tenders to build 323 apartment units in Jerusalem's Hilo, Har Homa, Pisgat Ziv, and Nev Yaakov neighborhoods. It said this, we strongly oppose settlement activity which is corrosive to the cause of peace. These steps by Israeli authorities are the latest examples of what appears to be a steady acceleration of settlement activity that is systematically undermining the prospects for a 2-state solution. She goes on and she says, look, to understand this, you need to understand that all this stuff going on, the 10-year deal, the sort of unhinged response of the State Department to the building of these apartments for Jews in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which even if they entered into a two-state solution would be part of Jewish Israel. And so Jews living in Jerusalem is a problem for our State Department. Do you understand how delusional that is? How absolutely, positively nuts that view is. It does not make any sense historically, geopolitically, or theologically, especially. Let's see. Let me go on here. Caroline says this. This too is a policy predicated on bigotry, on anti-Semitism. There is one more component to Obama's actions, which, like his anti-Jewish rationale, has spanned the length of his presidency. In 2010, remember this, I love Carolyn because she remembers things. In 2010, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton shocked Israeli society by screaming at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the telephone for 45 minutes. Clinton upbraided Netanyahu for a decision by a Jerusalem municipal planning boards to approve a stage in the planning process toward building apartments in Ramat Shlomo, an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem, a Jewish neighborhood. And Hillary Clinton had a 45-minute tirade. Listen, I believe that Secret Service agent when he talks about what happened in the White House quarters and stuff with her and how she was. I believe every word of what that man says. Israelis, Caroline says, and many Americans were shocked by her behavior because no previous administration had ever treated neighborhoods in Jerusalem as controversial. Everyone, including Obama, acknowledged that the major population centers in Judea and Samaria, these neighborhoods will remain part of Israel in perpetuity. Yet suddenly, in 2010, Clinton and Obama began castigating them as illegal settlements. In other words, they expanded the meaning of settlement to include all Jewish communities located in areas that had been under Jordanian occupation between 1949 and 1967. And she is exactly right. You want to call it Israeli occupation? Call it Jordanian occupation. And Jews were banned from the Wailing Wall for 20 years. By Jordan, that's considered one of the moderate companies. Given the fact that U.S. public does not share Obama's hostility toward the Jewish state, prudence would recommend that he advance his bigoted aims as quietly as possible. So what is he up to? With 3 months until the election, Obama is focused on legacy building. Last week's statement demonstrates that by shaping the U.S.'s future policy towards Israel is a major component of the legacy he is building. And what is the shape he is giving to that policy through his actions? By openly employing anti-Jewish policy rationales, Obama shows that the legacy he intends to pass on to his successors is a U.S. policy towards Israel based neither on U.S. interests nor on American values. Rather, it is predicated on unabashed anti-Jewish discrimination. I am so grateful to the Lord for this lady to speak the truth to what this man, this human geopolitical wrecking ball is doing to the world. I should copyright that one. In other words, Obama's presidential legacy is the promotion of anti-Semitism as the guiding principle shaping and informing U.S.-Israel policy. This, to be sure, is a stunning, indeed shocking conclusion. It points to the depth of Obama's hostility to Jewish national and civil rights. But as his administration statements make clear, the conclusion that anti-Semitism is the guiding principle of his policies is unavoidable. Those running to succeed Obama should be urged to denounce his bigotry and renounce his legacy. I'm waiting Hillary Clinton. I'm confident that one of the other candidates will do this. By the same token, the Israeli pro-Palestinian left and the American pro-Obama left should be urged to distance themselves from him. As long as they refuse to do so, as long as they continue to support Obama, they make clear that for them, anti-Jewish bigotry is no big deal. As far as they are concerned, Jewish rights should only be respected when doing so advances their political goals. This means that Obama's supporters can no longer claim to be liberals. Now that we understand that anti-Jewish bigotry and the rejection of Jewish civil rights is the rationale informing Obama's policy toward the Jewish state, it is clear that it is no longer possible to be both a liberal and an Obama supporter. This is his legacy, and this is their choice. Israel's apparent desire to conclude as soon as possible. Oh, that's the end of her article. So this is what she says is true. This is a sign of the end times. This gathering of the nations against Israel, supposedly their best friend in the world, at least our administration, has turned against them. And he is trying to put in place things that will last for at least 10 years after he's gone to prevent people from changing his anti-Jewish bigotry legacy. Draw your own conclusions from that. I'm not giving you any. I'm just saying, why would he try to put that in place for 10 years? I don't know. And here's one more article. Shin Bet came out and said that Hamas had actually infiltrated an international Gaza aid group. That group is World Vision. Rather than go into it and play all the clips, what we'll do is we'll put in the show notes a link to the YouTube video from February of 2015. I think it was around February the 8th of 2015. I actually talked about World Vision and what they were doing and how this anti-Zionist strain had risen up in World Vision. So look, World Vision is claiming we're innocent, we didn't do this intentionally, this is lie, this is propaganda, this is all made up. And I'm telling you, as I don't at this point believe a word that World Vision says on this. Now, it is true that every aid organization that goes into Gaza gets infiltrated by Hamas and the money gets diverted to other things. And what the Israeli government has come out and said is they diverted the money to build tunnels that were used in the assault on Israel back in 2014 that led to the last Gaza incursion by Israel. And it was supposed to build hospitals and schools. It got diverted to build military facilities and buy military arms that were smuggled in from the Sinai. World Vision has, in my view, really destroyed their credibility. They are part of the Lausanne movement. They had a big meeting in Cape Town back in 2010. I've played you some clips of that. I think I discussed this more in that February 2015 update that I did. You remember there were a couple guys who I enjoy listening to, I've listened to, although I find it ironic that David Wells and Oz Guinness came out and they talk about these people who are, the interesting timing on this is Pam and I were in California back around the time of this, and we went to a lecture that Oz Guinness was giving at Biola. I know that's what geeky people do on vacation, on a beautiful night in California. You go to Biola to listen to a lecture instead of going to the beach. So that's for us to deal with in our miserable, boring lives. But the irony of it was that his lecture that night was about civility. Christians need to be civil. It was within weeks or a month that this article came out in advance of the Lausanne 2010 thing in Cape Town, where Guinness referred to the curmudgeons of the evangelical community who actually believe in the end times. Well, curmudgeon is not a very civil term to be using about a Christian brother. Okay? So I think it met the definition of irony, that I was listening to him talk about civility and then saw him not do it. But Stephen Hawes, in connection with Lausanne, he's been a VP for World Vision. I don't know if he's still there, but he gave a bunch of lectures in January 2015 at Gordon Conwell Seminary in Massachusetts, engaging a world of poverty and injustice. His lecture notes were called All of Me. engaging a world of poverty and injustice. And one of the things he focused on in that talk, and you can listen to I have a number of clips from that. He talks about this Christian Zionism thing that people believe in. And in that, I also tie it into some things that Rob Bell said. It's actually, I think, I can humbly say, I think I did a pretty good job of tying those things together. And but World Vision doesn't accept an end-time role for the Jewish state of Israel. That's not part of their theology. So the fact that they got bamboozled by Hamas in Gaza is of no surprise. As our friend Jacob says, you're wrong on Israel. It's probably not the only thing you're wrong on. And I agree with that. So look, this is the world we live in. It's delusional. You see it in the church. You see it in society. You see it in professional associations. You see it in geopolitics. It's the world that I think we're going to live in until Jesus returns. It could change. But at this point, I think we're past the tipping point. So what do? We get ready. We get ready. By the way, sidebar comment, Pastor J.D. Frog, we don't agree on everything. He's a good brother. He loves the Lord. He talks about Bible prophecy at his church every week in Hawaii, Kanaoe on the North Shore. And by the way, I wrote to him recently. We've been emailing. I don't know if I told you this, but I suggested to him that the Lord was leading me, that I thought that the Lord was leading me to exchange places with him this winter for a couple of months. He could use the house. We have a new furnace. He could turn it up to 80. I'd pay the bill and everything. And he just said that, no, that's not what the Lord's telling him. And he used to live in Spokane, and he says he hasn't stopped shivering since he moved to Hawaii 10 years ago. So good brother. He had, you can find it, J.D. Farag, F-A-R-A-G, at his church. Mir Sarfati is there this weekend, great speaker. He gave a talk Thursday night. He did an interview yesterday, speaking twice more. I would highly recommend you go and look at what Amir's saying, because Amir's one of the voices that I think should listen to. We met him when we were up in Minneapolis for Jan's conference last fall. Great brother in Christ. Highly recommend that. So let's pray and let's go. Father, thanks so much for giving us a roadmap, a outline of the markers we should be looking for in these times, so that we, even as perplexing as it is, we know that this is what you're doing to fulfill Bible prophecy and to glorify yourself. And Lord, we pray that you will guide us to act in accordance with your plan, so that you may be glorified in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.